Hey everyone, welcome to my Q&A. Thank you everyone who is tuning in live. You are more than welcome to pop your questions in the comments. I'll check them before the Q&A is over. And if you are watching the replay, then I can take your questions next time. So if you have a question that you want me to answer, make sure that you ask. Otherwise, I'm going to start right in with the questions that were submitted in advance. The first question is, let's see here, is how many times a week should I practice Ashtanga yoga? The good question. So typically we practice in a typical Ashtanga week, it's either 5 or 6 times a week that you practice. You have one rest day. It's usually for most people either Saturday or Sunday, but of course that was kind of the tradition, or the tradition was Saturday because Saturday is a malefic planet day. It's ruled by Saturn, malefic planet. So Patabi had that be the rest day. Since then, it's changed, and a lot of people take Sunday as the rest day instead. But you know, even a more modern context, a lot of people practice both days of the weekend just because that's when people have more free time, or at least people working traditional jobs. So typically there's one scheduled rest day a week. There is also, as you probably know, usually moon days every week, right? So, or every month, 2 moon days a month. So those are your other rest days. Also, when you have ladies' holiday, that would be a time that you don't practice. That would be the first 3 days of your cycle, rest day, just because of the nature of the aponic flow of a period and the pranic flow of practice. And of course, then you also would avoid practice when you have a fever or other illness, acute injury. I think that's also a good time to rest. But let's say, given other good circumstances, most practice weeks are either 5 or 6 days. And I think it's pretty valuable to do that when you can, but I think that it's also very important to realize that not all 5 or 6 of those days need to be 60 minutes or 120 minutes of practice. A short practice is better than no practice. And I think that as practitioners, when we get attached to doing a 2-hour-long practice, and it's like, I either got to get on my mat for 90 minutes or I don't have enough time to do anything at all, then we really get in a bad mindset, and that actually inhibits us from advancing. Getting on the mat more often, doing shorter practices is actually more beneficial than getting on less often and doing longer practices. So my suggestion is to get on with the mat with as much consistency as you possibly can. Some days you do a full practice, some days you do sun salutations, maybe some days you just stand in samastitihi. Typically, I tell people you practice 3 or 4 times a week. That is maintenance. But like you can keep your practice up with that. You can keep your strength, your subtlety. But if you're really looking for transformation, my suggestion is go for that 5 or 6 days a week. And it can be short practices, don't get me wrong, but 5 or 6 days a week, I believe you really enable more transformation in your body. And, you know, it just builds a habit around it, and it makes it easier to keep getting on your mat, because if you've been at this practice for any amount of time, you know that, yeah, it's hard to start an Ashtanga practice, even harder to keep it. It's hard to keep the practice. I mean, it's, you know, it's a big commitment. So that was my first, question. Let's see. I have a couple other questions, but where did I put those questions? Let me find them. Okay, next question. How long does it take for somebody to learn the primary series? Again, lots of variants here, but I'll tell you, in my experience, I would say typically, no matter what sequence you're learning on, I would plan on a minimum of 3 years. Now, of course, some people come into the practice having done like vinyasa style yoga or flow style yoga for, you know, 5 or 6 years. And often those students can learn primary series much more quickly. But I would say the average is anytime you're learning a new series, be it primary series, second series, third series, I would plan on about 3 years from start to finish. And this is just a suggestion, right? It's just kind of a baseline. It's, in my experience, the average. this is not a universal truth at all. Like some people are going to learn series really quickly. Some people are going to learn series over, much longer period of time. It really is individualized, but on average, I would say 3 years per series. But like, let's be real, right? Like if you have like this is a great example. So I frequently teach intro to Mysore workshops or intro to Ashtanga workshops. And let's just say like I have 12 people in a workshop. I would say like, after the workshop, like 2, 3 months after the workshop, probably about 25, 30% of those 12 students are still practicing. Like they're coming in every day and they're practicing. So like I'm keeping about 25% of them in the Mysore program. And then like maybe a year later, we're down to maybe I've lost maybe one more in the year. And then, like another year later, 5 years later, it's down to even fewer. So if you start with like 10 students, after right away, you're going to lose like more than half of them probably. Like maybe you keep 3. Out of those 3 students, you give it another, or let's say 4, you give it another 5 years. Now you're down to like 3 students. You've got one of them still working on primary series. You've got one started 3rd series, and you've got another one who's just starting 2nd series. So like you can't really, there's just not any universal way that it's done. And of course, if you have a bunch of different people start at the same time, a lot of them are just not going to take to the practice. It's not going to stick. Some of them are going to take primary series for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Other people are going to be ready to go into 3rd series after just 3 or 4 years. It's just such a different, it's different with every student. But I think what's most important is that you just keep getting on the map, because you don't know what's going to happen if you don't try. You don't know unless you begin. And, even if like you feel like, wow, primary series is super hard and I'm not very good at this and everything's difficult. Like, honestly, sometimes those people just breeze through the first half of 2nd series. And I think that's kind of where I get that average of 3 years per series, because often, like you're moving along pretty quickly and then somebody gets stuck on a posture for like a year and it's just hard, or there's a major setback, like a injury, or somebody, you get pregnant or you start a new job and you have like these things that really kind of derail your practice. So, so things like, it's hard to say how long it's ever going to take, but, like sometimes you get stuck on a pose for like a year and then you get the rest of the series in like the next couple of months, because all that work, all those practices that you spent like learning Pinchamayurasana or Marichasana or one of those really hard poses that like people sometimes spend a year at those poses. But it's not that you're only working on that pose. You might not realize it at the time, but everything that you're doing up to that posture, and even your back bends and your closing sequence, like it's a cumulative practice. All that work that you do in that one pose or in everything else leading up to that posture and after that posture, it does all continue to translate. It's not only about that one posture that you might be stuck on. You extract information from that. Like if you're stuck on Marichasana D for years and you're like, oh my God, I'm just never going to get past this. And then all of a sudden you start getting it. And the rest of the primary might just take you like a week, because you put in so much hard work and you got your vinyasas down, you've got the strength, and the rest of it, you've got the openness, and the rest of it might come super easily. And I see that a lot with Pinchamayurasana. It's a hard posture. People spend years getting strong enough for Pinchamayurasana. And Pinchamayurasana is a really good example because it's pretty hard to start working on a Karandavasana until you've got a decent pincha. So a lot of people kind of hit a little bit of a wall there, but it's temporary. And it all is temporary in practice. Like any wall you hit, you're going to break through. It just, sometimes you break through in a week and sometimes you break through in a year. And so it's all good work and it all adds up. And, like you spend a year working on Pinchamayurasana, maybe you're getting really frustrated, but I can almost guarantee you the rest of 2nd series will come pretty quickly if you put in that good work there. And those are just kind of examples. Like I like to move people along kind of quickly because I think that, I think you got to look at the series as a whole series. And if you get too narrow focused on one pose, you're missing the forest for the trees and you're just not seeing the bigger picture. And so often the postures that come after whatever pose you might be stuck on are actually going to kind of circle back and help you. And I think, like, however you're looking at the practice, whatever, if you're stuck on a pose or if you're going past the knee, you're still kind of working backwards, look at it as a bigger circle, because because that, you need that perspective. You want to be looking at the bigger picture. And so often things that come after, you don't want to look at a posture in a vacuum because it's just not enough information. So it's often what comes before and what comes after is going to help you with just exactly where you are right now. And then the last question I got was actually, it was on Instagram. And the question is, on completing second series this past year, I find that my hips are more open than ever before. Because of this and the fact that my dad is in the middle of a double hip replacement, I started to have loads of anxiety around the hip joints and too much laxity, fragility in the joints. What can I do to balance out with strength? And, this is a really good question. First of all, second series does tend to jack people's anxiety up. So just make sure you're taking a really long closing sequence to help settle you down after second series. And I'm actually teaching my second series interactive course. It's a 2-month-long course. I'm going to teach that in March. So be on the lookout for that because it's super thorough. We have practices, we have lots of discussions, and there's an entire library of videos. So I go into it in great depth there, but the thing is that, you have to look at, so if you're feeling really nervous, anxious in your practice, closing sequence, the headstands at the end of second series can also kind of help settle that energy. Making sure you're doing primary once a week, but maybe even more often if that helps you to feel better. And so those are just a couple of things, but back to more of the issue around the hips. So I'm trying to, she wrote several paragraphs, but I mean, I think that's kind of the gist of it is what can I do about too much fragility in the joints? And, there's a lot of things that you can do. One of them would be to change your perspective about your practice. Like, it actually, when I taught my sort of the sponing, I made a suggestion on a posture, and the student said, but then I don't feel as much opening. It's not as big of a stretch. It's not actually about getting the biggest stretch. And I think as yogis, we forget that because we get addicted to the stretch. It feels good. You want to get open. Like, we all like those feelings, but it's not really about the stretch like that. We're not here to stretch. So check yourself. If you're trying to get deeper and deeper into the pose and always going for the deepest that you can possibly be, and like you want to stretch, like, change your perspective. It's about being integrated. It's about finding breath and stillness in each pose. And sometimes that means dialing it back a little so that you're not overstretching. So if you're worried about too much fragility in the joints or overstretching, I mean, my go-to, if you follow me at all, I'm always like Pilates, do Pilates. Pilates works. It does work. It's, you build strength, you keep flexibility, and you control your movements. I love Pilates. I have a bunch of videos on my website. If you go through these live streams, there's a Pilates video that I taught to you guys a couple months back, like a 15-minute Pilates routine. Do Pilates. It helps. It's going to use your bandhas. It was a generic answer, but use your bandhas. That also helps. Like, it's not about opening up. You want to collect yourself too. And it's about finding a balance between opening and collecting yourself in every pose. So don't go for the stretch. It's not about stretching. Like, that's just one very small part of it. And, find good alignment. Return to samastitihi in every single pose. Returning to samasti is, super valuable also, because if you're finding samastitihi in every pose, you're less likely to overstretch. I do believe that this practice can be a lifelong practice, but you want to treat it as such from day one. Like, if you don't want to, like, 20 years into practice, realize that you've had like 30, 40 injuries, all these major setbacks, and then be like, well, how do I practice for the rest of my life? Like, start thinking about that now. What's sustainable for you? Evaluate where you are every single day on your mat. At the start of practice, during practice, after practice, how you feel, what worked, what didn't work. How can you constantly improve it? Because it is an experiment and you want to constantly be getting better and figuring out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. So that would be one of my suggestions. And then the other suggestion would just be like learning some alternatives to the full expression of the pose, right? Like maybe putting your foot behind your head every day is just not the right move for you. Doesn't mean you can do it some days, but maybe other days it's like you want to just kind of dial it back and make an approximation of that shape. And, like so that you get some of the sensation and you're extracting a lot of that same value. And then you just keep going. So, not every day is going to be doing 100% of all the asanas, definitely not the fullest expression of all the asanas. Find some middle ground that works for your body, that is sustainable for your practice for the long haul, not like sustainable for the next week or month, for the long haul. And then, get benefit from that. And so I guess that would be my answer. Like, learn to dial it back in a way that is appropriate, where you're still getting value when you need to. And my suggestion would be to like have that be actually pretty regular. Mix it in with some stabilizing core work, pay a lot of attention to pelvic stability, and let go of that notion that it's all about stretching, because it's not. And sometimes getting less of a stretch is better. Like a lot of the time. Actually all the time you're trying to meet strength and flexibility. It's like you're meeting someplace in the middle there. And if you're too attached to strength or you're too attached to flexibility, then, like you're missing a lot of the value of the practice. So think about stillness, think about breath, think about alignment. There's a lot of things to think about other than getting open or getting strong. All right, does anyone else have any questions for me? Let me pop into the Facebook group. If you do, go ahead and drop it, and I'll be happy to answer it. There's a little bit of a lag, so I will give it a second for any of your questions to appear. And then the other thing is that next week, David Garrigue is going to come onto this live stream, which I just kind of asked him on a whim and he agreed to, so I thought that was pretty cool. So please tune in next week. That is going to be Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time. And I would really, really love it if you could tune in live next week. And Jackie, stretches before bed to complement the practice. Good question. I would actually... So before bed, I would suggest like something like a little bit more cooling. So maybe like kind of like a gentle flow, Jackie. And I could actually maybe post it in the group, something to show you. But like before bed, forward folds are good. Legs up the wall are good. You could do like a pigeon, or the pigeon lying on your back if like a figure of horse stretch, if that's better for your hips. You could do some seated twists. I always like little shoulder stretches like this, like pushing away, lifting up, and then interlacing behind the back and taking a big pull. Lying over a bolster, Jackie, legs wide, lying over a bolster, legs together, lying over a bolster, lying back with a bolster behind you and supporting your sacrum. So Jackie's in Ashtanga Central. Well, she's been a student for a long time, but she's actually also in Ashtanga Central, which registration is open if you want to join. Jackie, if you can make the restorative class next Saturday, that would be really good. And all of those things are typically things that you can do before bed. But my favorites are forward bends and like variations of that, because those are, they kind of make you sleepy, right? So we talked a little bit about second series already. So primary series kind of has the opposite sensations, and a lot of people feel kind of sleepy after primary series. I mean, I don't personally. So I would try some of that, Jackie. I would do some of those restorative poses. like some gentle twists would be okay. I like lying down with both legs dropped over to one side. So like, for instance, you lie on your back, you drop both legs over to the right, you lift your left arm up, and then you get a super nice stretch all the way down the side, and then you could do the other one. Those are good ones before sleep. But Jackie, that restorative class will show you a lot of stuff. And restorative yoga or like gentle stretches before bed, it's way different than what we do in our Ashtanga practice typically, but it's a really nice balance. And they open up different meridians in the body. And I haven't studied it much. It's been I have a couple books on it, but I don't completely understand it. But there were years ago, like when I was in grad school, I used to take a lot of yin style classes because it did kind of help to settle me down. And Tori, who asked the question that I looked to my phone to read the question from, that actually might be a good way for you to kind of settle down a little bit too, because it does help to the Ashtanga practice can be pretty rajasic, and I think that we all like it. That's why we're doing it, right? Like you like it, obviously that works for you, but sometimes you do need to kind of do something a little bit different. So stretches before bed is good, especially like Jackie said at this time of year. Like it's dry, it's cold. These are not the most conducive things for an Ashtanga practice. So take good care of yourself. Oil baths are good too. I don't do oil baths because they're too messy, but I do castor oil packs. So I just put the castor oil on like a towel, like a face cloth, and then put that on my joints that need it. I don't know. There's things that you can do, but some nice stretches before bed are good. And there's some. I'm gonna look for Jackie because I saw something on it online. I think it was new just this morning or last night on good poses to do before bed. So I'll try to find that. All right. I am going to go walk my dogs. Thanks so much for tuning in. And please, please, please tune in live at 11 Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern on Friday, a week from today, because David Garrigue is coming in. And I really think it's pretty cool that he's doing that. So if you guys could come in live, that would make it even better. All right, you guys have an awesome, awesome weekend. And thank you so much for being here. Bye.